The economy of India is the seventh largest in the world by nominal GDP and the third largest by purchasing power parity. The country is classified as a newly industrialized country, one of the G20 major economies, a member of BRICS and a developing economy with approximately 7% average growth rate for the last 2 decades. Maharashtra is the richest state and has GDP of $220 billion. Nearly equal to that of Pakistan or Portugal, and accounts 12% of Indian GDP, followed by Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh. India's economy became the world's fastest-growing major economy from the last quarter of 2014, replacing the People's Republic of China. The long-term growth perspective of the Indian economy is moderately positive due to its young population, corresponding low dependency ratio, healthy savings and investment rates, and increasing integration into the global economy. The Indian economy has the potential to become the world's third largest economy by the next decade, and one of the largest economies by mid-century. And the outlook for short-term growth is also good, as according to the IMF, the Indian economy is the bright spot in the global landscape. India also topped the World Bank's growth outlook for 2015-16 for the first time, with the economy having grown 7.3% in 2014-15 and expected to grow 7.5–8.3% in 2015-16. India has one of the fastest-growing service sectors in the world, with annual growth rate of above 9% since 2001, which contributed to 57% of GDP in 2012-13. India has capitalized its economy based on its large educated English-speaking population to become a major exporter of IT services, BPO services, and software services, with $167 billion worth of service exports in 2013-14. It is also the fastest-growing part of the economy. The IT industry continues to be the largest private sector employer in India. India is also the fourth largest startup hub in the world, with over 3,100 technology startups in 2014-15. The agricultural sector is the largest employer in India's economy but contributes to a declining share of its GDP. India ranks second worldwide in farm output. The industry sector has held a constant share of its economic contribution. The Indian automobile industry is one of the largest in the world, with an annual production of 21.48 million vehicles in FY 2013-14. India has $600 billion worth of retail market in 2015 and one of the world's fastest-growing e-commerce markets. India's two major stock exchanges, Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange of India, had a market capitalization of $1.71 trillion and $1.68 trillion respectively as of February 2015, which ranks 11th and 12th largest in the world respectively, according to the World Federation of Exchanges. India also home to world's third largest billionaires pool, with 97 billionaires in 2014, and fourth largest number of ultra-high net worth households that have more than $100 million. India is a member of the Commonwealth of Nations, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, the G20, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the United Nations and the New Development BRICS Bank. Overview. The combination of protectionist, import substitution, Fabian socialism, social democratic-inspired policies governed India for some time after the end of British occupation. The economy was then characterized by extensive regulation, protectionism, public ownership of large monopolies, pervasive corruption and slow growth. Since 1991, continuing economic liberalization has moved the country towards a market-based economy. By 2008, India had established itself as one of the world's faster-growing economies. Growth significantly slowed to 6.8% in 2008-09, but subsequently recovered to 7.4% in 2009-10, while the fiscal deficit rose from 5.9% to a high 6.5% during the same period. India's current account deficit surged to 4.1% of GDP during Q2 FY11 against 3.2% the previous quarter. The unemployment rate for 2012-13, according to Government of India's Labour Bureau, was 4.7% nationwide, by UPS method, and 3% by NSSO method. India's consumer price inflation has ranged between 8.9 to 12% over the 2009 to 2013 period. History. Period up to 1793. The citizens of the Indus Valley Civilization, a permanent settlement that flourished between 2800 BC and 1800 BC, practiced agriculture, domesticated animals, used uniform weights and measures, made tools and weapons, and traded with other cities. Evidence of well-planned streets, a drainage system and water supply reveals their knowledge of urban planning, which included the world's first urban sanitation systems and the existence of a form of municipal government. Maritime trade was carried out extensively between South India and Southeast and West Asia from early times until around the 14th century AD. Both the Malabar and Coromandel coasts were the sites of important trading centres from as early as the 1st century BC, used for import and export as well as transit points between the Mediterranean region and Southeast Asia. Over time, traders organised themselves into associations which received state patronage. Ray Cowdery and Habib claim this state patronage for overseas trade came to an end by the 13th century AD, when it was largely taken over by the local Parsi, Jewish and Muslim communities, initially on the Malabar and subsequently on the Coromandel coast. Other scholars suggest trading from India to West Asia and Eastern Europe was active between 14th and 18th century. During this period, Indian traders had settled in Surakhani, a suburb of Greater Baku, Azerbaijan. These traders had built a Hindu temple, now preserved by the government of Azerbaijan. French Jesuit Villota, who lived in Azerbaijan in late 1600s, wrote this Indian temple was revered by Hindus. The temple has numerous carvings in Sanskrit or Punjabi, dated to be between 1500 and 1745 AD. The Atishka temple built by the Baku resident traders from India suggests commerce was active and prosperous for Indians by the 17th century. Further north, the Saurashtra and Bengal coasts played an important role in maritime trade, and the Gangetic plains in the Indus Valley housed several centers of riverborne commerce. Although many kingdoms and rulers issued coins, barter was prevalent. Villages paid a portion of their agricultural produce as revenue to the rulers, while their craftsmen received a part of the crops at harvest time for their services. Sean Harkin estimates China and India may have accounted for 60 to 70% of world GDP in the 17th century. Assessment of India's pre-colonial economy is mostly qualitative, owing to the lack of quantitative information. The Mughal economy functioned on an elaborate system of coined currency, land revenue and trade. Gold, silver and copper coins were issued by the royal mints, which functioned on the basis of free coinage. The political stability and uniform revenue policy resulting from a centralized administration under the Mughals, coupled with a well-developed internal trade network, ensured that India, before the arrival of the British, was to a large extent economically unified. Despite having a traditional agrarian economy characterized by a predominance of subsistence agriculture dependent on primitive technology. After the decline of the Mughals, western, central and parts of south and north India were integrated and administered by the Maratha Empire. After the loss at the Third Battle of Panipat, the Maratha Empire disintegrated into several confederate states. and the resulting political instability and armed conflict severely affected economic life in several parts of the country, although this was compensated for to some extent by localized prosperity in the new provincial kingdoms. By the end of the 18th century, the British East India Company entered the Indian political theatre and established its dominance over other European powers. This marked a determinative shift in India's trade, and a less powerful impact on the rest of the economy. British era. There is no doubt that our grievances against the British Empire had a sound basis. As the painstaking statistical work of the Cambridge historian Angus Maddison has shown, India's share of world income collapsed from 22.6% in 1700, almost equal to Europe's share of 23.3% at that time, to as low as 3.8% in 1952. Indeed, at the beginning of the 20th century, the brightest jewel in the British Crown was the poorest country in the world in terms of per capita income. Manmohan Singh. From the beginning of 19th century British East India Company's gradual expansion and consolidation of power brought a major change in the taxation and agricultural policies, which tended to promote commercialization of agriculture with a focus on trade, resulting in decreased production of food crops, mass impoverishment and destitution of farmers, and in the short term, led to numerous famines. The economic policies of the British Raj caused a severe decline in the handicrafts and handloom sectors, due to reduced demand and dipping employment. After the removal of international restrictions by the Charter of 1813, Indian trade expanded substantially and over the long term showed an upward trend. The result was a significant transfer of capital from India to England, which, due to the colonial policies of the British, led to a massive drain of revenue rather than any systematic effort at modernization of the domestic economy. British territorial expansion in India throughout the 19th century created an institutional environment that, on paper, guaranteed property rights among the colonizers, encouraged free trade, and created a single currency with fixed exchange rates, standardized weights and measures, and capital markets within the company-held territories. It also established a system of railways and telegraphs, a civil service that aimed to be free from political interference, a common law and an adversarial legal system. This coincided with major changes in the world economy, industrialization, and significant growth in production and trade. However, at the end of colonial rule, India inherited an economy that was one of the poorest in the developing world, with industrial development stalled, agriculture unable to feed a rapidly growing population, a largely illiterate and unskilled labor force, and extremely inadequate infrastructure. The 1872 census revealed that 91.3% of the population of the region constituting present-day India resided in villages, and urbanization generally remained sluggish until the 1920s, due to the lack of industrialization and absence of adequate transportation. Subsequently, the policy of discriminating protection, coupled with the Second World War, saw the development and dispersal of industries, encouraging rural-urban migration, and in particular the large port cities of Bombay, Calcutta and Madras grew rapidly. Despite this, only 1/6 of India's population lived in cities by 1951. The impact of British occupation on India's economy is a controversial topic. Leaders of the Indian independence movement and economic historians have blamed colonial rule for the dismal state of India's economy in its aftermath and argued that financial strength required for industrial development in Britain was derived from the wealth taken from India. At the same time, right-wing historians have countered that India's low economic performance was due to various sectors being in a state of growth and decline due to changes brought in by colonialism in a world that was moving towards industrialization and economic integration. Pre-liberalisation period Indian economic policy after independence was influenced by the colonial experience. which was seen by Indian leaders as exploitative, and by those leaders exposure to British social democracy as well as the planned economy of the Soviet Union. Domestic policy tended towards protectionism, with a strong emphasis on import substitution, industrialization, economic interventionism, a large government-run public sector, business regulation, and central planning, while trade and foreign investment policies were relatively liberal. 5-year plans of India resembled central planning in the Soviet Union. Steel, mining, machine tools, telecommunications, insurance, and power plants, among other industries, were effectively nationalized in the mid-1950s. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, along with the statistician Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis, formulated Mogul economic policy during the initial years of the country's independence. They expected favorable outcomes from their strategy, involving the rapid development of heavy industry by both public and private sectors, and based on direct and indirect state intervention, rather than the more extreme Soviet-style central command system. The policy of concentrating simultaneously on capital and technology-intensive heavy industry and subsidizing manual, low-skill cottage industries was criticized by economist Milton Friedman, who thought it would waste capital and labor, and retard the development of small manufacturers. The rate of growth of the Indian economy in the first 3 decades after independence was derisively referred to as the Hindu rate of growth by economists, because of the unfavorable comparison with growth rates in other Asian countries. Since 1965, the use of high-yielding varieties of seeds, increased fertilizers and improved irrigation facilities collectively contributed to the Green Revolution in India, which improved the condition of agriculture by increasing crop productivity, improving crop patterns, and strengthening forward and backward linkages between agriculture and industry. However, it has also been criticized as an unsustainable effort, resulting in the growth of capitalistic farming, ignoring institutional reforms and widening income disparities. Subsequently, the emergency and Garibi Hatao concept, under which income tax levels at one point rose to a maximum of 97.5%, a record in the world for non-communist economies, started diluting the earlier efforts. In the late 1970s, the government led by Morarji Desai eased restrictions on capacity expansion for incumbent companies, removed price controls, reduced corporate taxes and promoted the creation of small-scale industries in large numbers. Post-liberalization period, the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was India's major trading partner, and the Gulf War, which caused a spike in oil prices, resulted in a major balance of payments crisis for India, which found itself facing the prospect of defaulting on its loans. India asked for a $1.8 billion bailout loan from the International Monetary Fund, which in return demanded deregulation. In response, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, along with his Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, initiated the economic liberalisation of 1991. The reforms did away with the licence Raj, reduced tariffs and interest rates and ended many public monopolies, allowing automatic approval of foreign direct investment in many sectors. Since then, the overall thrust of liberalisation has remained the same, although no government has tried to take on powerful lobbies such as trade unions and farmers, on contentious issues such as reforming labour laws and reducing agricultural subsidies. By the turn of the 21st century, India had progressed towards a free market economy, with a substantial reduction in state control of the economy and increased financial liberalization. This has been accompanied by increases in life expectancy, literacy rates and food security, although urban residents have benefited more than rural residents. While the credit rating of India was hit by its nuclear weapons tests in 1998, it has since been raised to investment level in 2003 by S&P and Moody's. India enjoyed high growth rates for a period from 2003 to 2007, with growth averaging 9% during this period. Growth then moderated due to the global financial crisis starting in 2008. In 2003, Goldman Sachs predicted that India's GDP in current prices would overtake France and Italy by 2020, Germany, UK and Russia by 2025 and Japan by 2035, making it the third largest economy of the world, behind the US and China. India is often seen by most economists as a rising economic superpower and is believed to play a major role in the global economy in the 21st century. Starting in 2012, India entered a period of more anemic growth, with growth slowing down to 4.4%. Other economic problems also became apparent: a plunging Indian rupee, a persistent high current account deficit and slow industrial growth. Hit by the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to taper quantitative easing, foreign investors had been rapidly pulling out money from India, though this has now reversed with the stock market at near all-time high and the current account deficit narrowing substantially. India is ranked 130th out of 189 countries in the World Bank's 2015 Ease of Doing Business Index. In terms of dealing with construction permits and enforcing contracts, it is ranked among the 10 worst in the world, while it has a relatively favorable ranking when it comes to protecting minority investors or getting credit.